Hello and welcome back to Configure This Now. My name is Tim Haney, and in this video we're going to be covering how to configure the most common types of SSIDs on the Aruba controller. Please make sure you turn on those YouTube annotations in case I have to do any on-screen corrections after it's uploaded. This is my standard disclaimer. Please go ahead and pause to read it. This is my network diagram, which I break down in much greater detail on the first video in this series. So please make sure to go back to that video if you are not familiar with the diagram already. Here's our agenda. We're going to be talking about the three primary types of SSIDs, which are pre-shared key, 802.1x, and an open SSID with captive portal. That's usually used for guest. Everything else you see here on this slide is more or less the types of profiles and components that we need to configure on the Aruba controller to support these SSIDs. Okay? So before we go too far into it, I want to go over the hierarchy of profiles that you set up on the Aruba controller to get an SSID up and running. So I've opened up the document Aruba Campus Wireless Networks. This is a freely available document. Just search for the Aruba VRDs, and you'll find this document in that list. The VRDs are a fantastic reference to learn how everything gets put together and best practices and so forth. So I'm going to scroll down here to page 41. Okay. Because I want to take a look at this image right here. At the very top level, we have our AP group. Now remember that your access points are part of one and only one AP group. And underneath that, you have a whole host of different types of profiles that could be attached to that AP group. Oops, excuse me. So underneath the AP group, we have the virtual AP profile. Okay? And every SSID is going to have a virtual AP. So why is it called a virtual AP? Well, think about your off-the-shelf Wi-Fi router that you might get at Fry's or Best Buy, like a Linksys, a Belkin, D-Link, TrendNet, any of those brands. When you configure that Wi-Fi router at home, you have one SSID. Okay, but now we're taking the AP hardware itself and broadcasting multiple SSIDs from that hardware, and that's why it's called a virtual AP, because we're more or less virtualizing the hardware to support many different SSIDs. Beneath the virtual AP, we have the AAA profile. That's going to cover what type of firewall rules and servers get used, essentially anything related to the security of the SSID. And down here we have the SSID profile. Okay, that's where you configure, for example, the name of the SSID, the encryption of the SSID, and so on and so forth. And we're going to cover all of these major components that I've just talked about as we go through the configuration today. So let's go ahead and get started on configuring. I'm going to go over to my Super Putty and I'm going to open up the master controller. Because remember that major configuration changes that could be applied across multiple types of multiple controllers in your architecture, those configurations can only be made on the master controller. So go into configuration mode. The first SSID that I'm going to create is one using a pre-shared key, because that's the simplest one to configure. So to do that, let's create a virtual AP. So the command is wlan virtual AP, and then we'll give it a name. So we'll call this ctn-psk. Actually, I changed my mind. What I want to do instead is I want to actually name all of my profiles with a convention that indicates what the profile is. So we'll actually call this. Well, first I'm going to remove the old one. No wlan virtual AP ctn-psk, and we'll create a new one. wlan virtual AP ctn-psk-vap. VAP means virtual AP. Okay, and we'll follow that sort of convention as we go along creating these profiles. Okay, now if we refer back to our diagram here, underneath the virtual AP we're going to need at a minimum the two major components of AAA profile and SSID profile. Let's do the SSID profile first. We'll come back to the virtual AP. So let's create an SSID profile, VLAN SSID profile, and this is going to be CTN-PSK-SSID. Alright, to give the SSID a name that gets broadcasted over the air, the command is ESSID, and then we'll type the name. So the name in this case is going to be CTN-PSK. That's what actually appears over the air, remember. Okay, and we want to set the encryption, and this is going to be a PSK. So the command that we need to use is op mode, and let's take a look at the list here. We can use WEP. Hopefully you don't do that. WPA with AES, that implies you're going to use a radius server. I'm sorry, that would actually be WPA1. You would actually want WPA2 AES for WPA2 Enterprise. But in this case, we want to actually configure one with a pre-shared key, so we'll do WPA2 PSK AES. Okay, and it threw a warning because we didn't configure the pre-shared key first. So let's give it a pre-shared key, WPA passphrase. We'll just use what I've been using for all the passwords so far, and that's admin123. And now let's set the op mode. There, that time it didn't throw an error. So let's go ahead and apply this SSID profile to the virtual AP. Show WLAN virtual AP in case you forget what it is. Now I know what it is. It's up here, of course, but you can always do the show command to see what's in the list. So we'll go into that virtual AP, and we'll assign the SSID profile that we just created, which is CTN-PSK SSID. Whoops. And it throws an error because we did not properly set up the AAA profile to support this type of SSID. So we need to take another step back and go to that AAA profile. So we'll create a new AAA profile. This one's going to be called CTN-PSK-AAA. And for a pre-shared key SSID, the important component that we need to make sure that we configure is the let's see, what is it called? Show. I'm actually drawing a blank. Let's go ahead and actually look at the diagram, see if we get a hint here, because I can't actually remember. There it is, an 802.1x auth profile. So what I was looking for was the AAA Authentication .1x profile that actually uses pre-shared key. Alright, so go back to my AAA profile, CTN-PSK-AAA .1x, no, Authentication.1x is going to be default-PSK. Now that is required anytime you do a pre-shared key SSID. And we're going to say that the initial role is authenticated. Okay? What is authenticated? That is actually a, well, it's the name of a role, obviously, but it also implies that this role has a set of access lists that are associated with it that will allow users to access or not access certain resources. If I actually do show rights, we can see all of the roles that are predefined on the controller, and one of them is called authenticated, and you can see that there's several access lists that are already assigned. This is a predefined role, so that's why these are already partially configured. Let's take a deeper look at that role. Show rights authenticated. Whole lot of information about the role itself. we can see the list of access lists, and then we see what is on each individual access list. And we can see one of these access lists is called allow all, and here it is with a basically just a permit any. So this role, this initial role that we've assigned to this pre-shared key, is basically saying any traffic is allowed when you're connected to this SSID. Okay? Did I already assign that one? Let's make sure it's there. Okay. Now, let's go back to our virtual AP. CTN-PSK-VAP. And we'll first assign the AAA profile, which is CTN-PSK-AAA, followed by the SSID profile, CTN-PSK-SSID. And now if I do show WLAN virtual AP, followed by the name, of course, we can see that we've assigned this SSID profile and this AAA profile. But what I'm missing is a VLAN. Okay? So let's say you have a whole set of controllers in your master local domain. The various controllers are different sites. The different sites don't have a common VLAN convention. Okay? But if you were to use a numbered VLAN, that is to say the VLAN ID, you would actually have to create a virtual AP for each unique site, right? So you would have to say, let's just go back into the profile. This is going to be on VLAN, I don't know, for example, 53. Okay? If you have other sites that are not using VLAN 53 for this SSID, that means you have, like I said, you have to create a new one for each site. So the way to get around having to create a different virtual IP for every single site is to create a VLAN name. The name is kind of an abstraction, if you will, so that you can actually map that name to an actual VLAN ID on every individual controller. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the name first. VLAN name is going to be corp-VLAN. Okay, and let's go ahead and write mem because we're on the master controller, and we'll wait for this to propagate down to the local controllers. And we can see we finished on LMS2. So let's open up LMS2 because he's ready. So now down at the LMS level, we should be able to see show run pipe include VLAN dash name. Oh, it's not there. Let's see if it just takes this. Corp VLAN, and then we're going to assign the VLAN ID, which from my network diagram was 50. Well, let's check out and see if we have any errors here. No errors. So why did this not copy down? Alright, let's try it again. There, okay, now it shows up. This is kind of a problem I've been having with this particular version of AOS, is that sometimes I have to do a write mem twice for the configuration to come down correctly. So let's go ahead and we're going to map this name to a real VLAN number. So the command would be VLAN followed by the name corp-VLAN, and now the number, which from my network diagram was 50. Okay. We go back to the master controller, show WLAN virtual AP, and we're going to do WLAN virtual AP CTN-PSK-VAP. The VLAN is going to be the name rather than the ID, corp VLAN. Okay, that way when this configuration gets pushed down, whichever VLAN is mapped on the local controller to corp name, that's what actually gets used. So we've done it on LMS2, we just need to make sure we do it on LMS1. Oops, my caps lock was on. There we go. VLAN corp VLAN is 50. Okay, now it's mapped on both the local controllers. And you can see that there's an error on the master controller because we did not map corp VLAN to anything on this controller. In fact, if we do show profile errors, we would see that we would see basically the same message. But that's okay because we're not terminating any access points on the master controller. We're only doing it on the local controllers. So this is actually okay on the master controller. Okay, so moving on, let's take a look at the current configuration of the VAP. Oops. Show. We got our AAA profile assigned, we have our SSID profile assigned, we have our VLAN assigned. Okay? Why don't we just take a quick look at the configuration in the show run. AAA. Okay, we can see our configuration for the AAA profile. We assigned the .1x profile as default PSK, which, like I mentioned, is required for any PSK. And we said the initial role when you first connect is authenticated, which is allow all. If we move on, we should see the SSID profile, which I think I just skipped over it. There's our SSID profile with the name CTN-PSK, the op mode, and the passphrase, which is encrypted, which you can show in clear text if you use the command encrypt disable. And then those two profiles are assigned down on the virtual AP, and we also have the corp VLAN assigned to this virtual AP as well. So the last step to actually get this to broadcast is to actually assign it to whichever AP group you want that SSID broadcasted on. Show AP group. So for this SSID, we'll go ahead and just pretend that we only want this one on our local campus APs and we don't want it on any remote APs. So let's go into the configuration of the AP group. And all we have to do now is map that virtual AP in the group. And the name of it was CTN-PSK-VAP. Show AP group. And we can see that we have that virtual AP within the group now. So any access points that are broadcasting, any access points that are alive and part of that AP group will now start broadcasting. So if I go down to my networks here and I look at my wireless networks, it's not going to show up yet because I have not committed using the write mem command to go down to the local controller. So let's do another write mem. Okay, that has propagated down. Let's go down to our local controller. Let's go ahead and check that that configuration made it down. Let's do it with the running config this time. show running config pipe begin AP group, AP-group. And we have the virtual AP is assigned to the AP group that we want. And in our previous video, we already went through the process of provisioning our access point. So at this point, we should see the SSID being broadcast. There it is, CTN-PSK. And we should also see that our AP is now active. Show AP active. Not on this controller. Let's see if it's on the other one. Show AP active. There it is. Now, the command show AP active is only going to show APs that are currently broadcasting a working SSID. And what do I mean by a working SSID? Well, specifically for the point of this demonstration, I mean that the AP doesn't, or the virtual AP does not have any profile errors. And remember, one of the errors we saw before was that we didn't map the VLAN to the VLAN name to an actual VLAN ID number, and that threw an error. But we've already gone ahead and done that. If I had forgotten that step, there would be no APs in the active AP table, but they would still show in the AP database. The AP is going to show up in this output regardless of if it's active or not. Okay? So that's all we had to do for our pre-shared key SSID. Let's go on to the next most complex one, which is going to be an SSID configured with 802.1x. Alright, so this time I'm going to start at the lower level. I'll start with the SSID profile. So WLAN SSID, of course you have to be on the master controller, otherwise it's not going to work. WLAN SSID profile CTN-.1x is what I'm going to call it, dash SSID. The name of the SSID is going to be CTN-.1x. You might actually call this the Corp Wireless SSID, so you might just say Corp instead of .1x, but up to you, of course. And let's see, the encryption that we're going to be using is WPA2. What I meant by that was the op mode. The op mode we're using is WPA2 AES. And of course, like I mentioned before, that means we're going to be using a radius server, an authentication server. We're going to be using WPA2 Enterprise rather than Personal for this SSID. Back out. Let's do the AAA profile next. AAA profile CTN-.1x-AAA. And we're going to, let's go ahead and assign the .1x default role as authenticated, just like we did with the previous SSID. Authenticated, all right. Now notice we didn't use initial role this time, we used .1x default role. So essentially we want to use the .1x default role for an 802.1x SSID rather than the initial role, because the initial role doesn't actually get used once the user is authenticated with 802.1x. So instead he'll be assigned the .1x default role. Okay, but we also need to assign a list of radius servers to use. So let's go ahead and define those radius servers first. AAA Authentication, AAA Authentication dash server, and this is going to be a radius server. CTN dash CPPM for ClearPass dash server. Okay, he's going to use his IP address is going to be. Actually, let's not use IP address, let's use FQDN. So the host for this server profile is going to be ctn-cppm.example.com. Now this server isn't set up yet, so that'll resolve, but it won't ping. And with Radius, you need to configure a shared secret. That shared secret is used for encryption and decryption between the controller and the Radius server itself. So the key we're going to use is admin123. And that key must match on both sides, both the controller and the Radius server. And that should be good enough. So you can define multiple authentication servers if you want for a particular SSID. So, if you want to configure some high availability or something, you can actually define a list of servers. Once you're all done, you actually put all of those servers into a server group. The command is AAA server group. This is going to be ctn-radius-server group. Okay, and the server that we're going to add is the one we just created, ctn-cppm-server. And finally, let's apply that server group to the AAA profile. Show the AAA profile so I can remember. All right, AAA profile ctn-.1x AAA. And we're going to assign the .1x server group is the one we just created, ctn-radius-server group. And now at this point, let's go ahead and finish up the configuration with the virtual AP. WLAN virtual AP ctn-.1x-VAP, where we're going to assign the AAA profile ctn.1x-AAA, and we're going to assign the SSID profile ctn-.1x-SSID. Let's see, .1x profile needs to be enabled in AAA profile. Okay, so one command I did forget. Remember when we configured the with the pre-shared key SSID, we had to assign the .1x profile of default-psk. In this case, we need to go back to our AAA profile. Let me back out. AAA profile ctn-.1x-AAA. Authentication.1x profile that we're going to use is default. How did I know to use default and default pre-sk? Because if you do the command show AAA authentication .1x, we see a list of profiles. I haven't defined anything new. I'm only using default and default PSK. Now, you can actually go in and define some more advanced parameters. Create your own 802.1x authentication profile, but typically that's not necessary. So we'll just use the default one. Now we have that assigned to the profile. Let's try to assign the AAA profile to the virtual AP. WLAN virtual AP ctn-.1x-VAP AAA profile is ctn-.1x-AAA SSID profile ctn-.1x-SSID. And let's assign the VAP to the AP group that we want. Show AP group. Let's assign it to both the CAP and the WRAP group for this one. So AP group ctn-cap-AP group virtual AP ctn-.1x-VAP, and we'll do the same command for the WRAP. So we configured the SSID profile with these commands. We configured the authentication server the server group, the AAA profile, the VAP, and finally we assign the VAP to the AP group. Now, if you're just starting out with Aruba, all of this probably feels like there's a lot to take in, and it is. It certainly is. Just by looking at this diagram that I showed you at the beginning of the video, you can see there's a lot of bits and pieces. Okay, but the more you get used to the system, the more you'll remember, oh yeah, I need to, in order to configure a virtual AP, I need a AAA profile and an SSID profile. Or if I'm going to configure, for example, some radio settings, it would be one of these profiles under RF. Okay, so it is kind of pieced together in a logical sort of fashion where you can build all the profiles you need. You can reuse the profiles in different parent profiles. For example, you can use the same AAA profile over and over, or the same SSID profile over and over, while assigning them to different virtual APs, just as an example. It really makes it so that you know, rather than having to set every single setting for every SSID, you can set it once and then apply it multiple times. And you know, the more you use it, like I said, you'll start to get the hang of it. At this point, I have most of the major components memorized as to what their hierarchy is, what their components are. I don't really need to reference the documentation, but it takes a long time to get there. So just practice and eventually it'll come natural to you. Okay, so now we've configured two SSIDs. Actually, I forgot one step. I forgot to assign the VLAN. WLAN virtual AP CTN-.1x-VAP. We're going to use the VLAN that we already created, the corp VLAN. And let's commit all of these configurations. So at this point we have committed the new SSID that we created, and that should now be broadcasting. And there it is. Okay, and assuming we've configured all of those individual components correctly, the server, the key, the SSID profile, you know, assuming everything that is configured correctly, I should now be able to set up my client to use EAP to authenticate to the correct server. Now, I don't have my Radius server set up yet. That's actually going to be the next video, so I can't actually test it at this point, but at least we can see the configuration that goes into this. Okay? So there's one more SSID that we're going to configure in this video, and that's probably the most complex one. That's going to be the Open SSID with captive portal authentication for guest users. Okay, and there's even more profiles that we need to configure than what we did for the 802.1x. So let's see if we can draw this out. Okay, so at the very top level we have our AP group. Beneath that we are going to have our VAP, virtual AP. Beneath that we're going to have our SSID profile, and we're going to have a AAA profile. Let's actually move this up. The AAA profile, and that AAA profile is going to have an initial role. The initial role is the role that's assigned when the user first connects to the SSID, okay? And since we're using a captive portal profile, or since we're using a captive portal, we want that initial role to only allow them to do basic functions, such as DHCP and DNS, and also allow them to reach the captive portal page. Okay, so the initial role, I'm going to call it ctn-logon role. ctn logon role. Okay. Under ctn logon role, draw my connecting lines. We're going to have, just like any role, we're going to have our access lists. But this role is also going to have a captive portal profile assigned. Captive portal profile. And we're going to call that profile ctn-guest CP prof. Okay. And like I said, the access lists that are going to be used here are only going to allow very basic functions, DHCP, DNS, ping, as well as getting to the captive portal. Okay. Under this captive portal profile, we're going to have the captive portal URL and the default role once they actually pass the captive portal. So we'll call our default role ctn-guest-role. And up here I'm actually going to change what I wrote initially. Let's use my eraser. Instead of ctn logon role, I'm going to call it ctn-guest logon role. Okay? Let's follow the conventions that I've already set up. And of course, the guest logon role will have its own set of ACLs that are going to be less restrictive than the logon role. So now it will allow them to go out to the internet, but we still want to prevent them from accessing internal resources. So let me just draw the final role that we're going to use, which is the ctn guest role. I forgot to indicate up here. This one is actually guest logon role. It's the guest logon role. Okay. Now, underneath the roles, of course, we're going to be listing access lists. And we're going to see here in a moment that sometimes when writing your access lists, you actually want to abstract things or use a name rather than to have to use hard IP addresses when actually writing the rules of the access list. So underneath the access list, we might reference what are called net destinations or aliases. Okay, and the net destination or alias let's expand this out. The net destination or alias is going to contain a list of IPs or subnets or web addresses that you can use in your access list rules. And if you're going to apply the same rule to an access list and you don't want to have to keep writing access list entries for them, you just add them into an alias. And I'll show you, we'll create a couple of them just so you can get the kind of a visual of how you might use an alias. Okay, so we have a lot of components we need to configure. Why don't we start, let's start at the top level and we'll work our way down. So WLAN virtual AP, we're going to call it ctn-guest-vap. We'll create the SSID profile, WLAN SSID profile, ctn-guest-SSID. The SSID name is ctn-guest. Op mode is open. Let's create the AAA profile. AAA profile. ctn-guest-AAA. Okay, we'll create the role, and you can see here I'm not actually tying everything together right away. I'm just kind of creating the objects themselves. So we're going to create a user role for logon. So user role ctn-guest-logon-role, and let's include some access lists that we know we're going to need to create. Include let's see, IP access list. No, we don't want that. I think we want access list, right? Yes, access list logon. It's a session-based access list. Session-based means that we're going to be utilizing the stateful firewall and actually watching for, we're going to be monitoring a client session and allowing traffic while the session is alive. Okay? We're going to use the logon access list. Logon control, is that the name? Logon dash control. Yes. Okay, that's a predefined access list. We're also going to be using the access list session that's predefined for captive portal. Now I want to make one very important note. You absolutely must use this captive portal profile, or this captive portal session access list in your logon role. Otherwise your captive portal will not work. Okay, and furthermore, it should be the last access list that we add to the role. Now I've added it here right after logon control, and that's not going to help us very much if we go in and add another access list below it. So let's go ahead and write our custom access list. Before I do that, let's actually create some. Let's create some aliases. All right, Netdestination. We'll create one alias for our guest captive portal servers. In this case, we're using ClearPass, so we'll call this one cppm-alias. And under this, we're going to add a host. And we can either enter the well, if we use host, then we actually add the IP address. You can also use a name. I would caution you against using a name because the controller needs to use the same DNS or have at least the same mapping for the name that the client would. Okay, so if a client is using a different DNS server than the controller is, the rule may not work. Now, in this case, we're using one DNS server, so we'll go ahead and use that, but be cautious when using the name. Make sure that any name you use, that client will actually resolve. the same way that the controller will. So the name we're going to use is CTN, oh, I don't want host, I want name. Name ctn-cppm-example.com. That reminds me, did I set up my authentication server correctly before? Show AAA authentication -server radius ctn-cppm.sfvr. Yes, that's exactly what I named it before. Alright, so we're still in our net destination. What have I entered so far? So I added just that server. Now, I can use this net destination to continue to add servers to allow clients to access those in the future if I want them to. That way I don't have to write a new access list rule. So let's go create the access list next. IP access list session. A session-based access list is the most common type of access list that you're going to write rules for on an Aruba controller. We'll call this one ctn-guest-permit cppm-ACL. Kind of a long name, but at least you know exactly what it is. Alright, so let's start with the source, which is going to be the user. The destination would be alias whatever I just defined, which was, I think I called it, where did I actually define it? cppm-alias. And the third parameter that you define would be any particular service. You know, for example, DNS is a service, or DHCP, or HTTP, or a specific TCP or UDP port. So in this case, we want to make sure the user is able to get to the HTTPS web page. So let's go ahead, before I finish writing the rule, let's look at the list of predefined services. So let's just do a show run pipe include Netservice. All of these are predefined. We're looking for HTTPS, so it should be named something logical. Let's see if I can find it. There's HTTP. We can see it's defined as TCP/80. Let's see, where's HTTPS? I'm probably not going to see it because I'm not good at finding things. Almost thought it was it there. Let's filter it. Include Netservice SVC-HTT. Let's see if that helps us out a little bit. There it is. Netservice SVC HTTPS. Okay, that's defined as TCP port 443. So let's write our rule. The source is the user. The destination is alias cppm-alias. The service is going to be SVC-HTTPS, and the rule is going to be permit. Okay, and there's several other parameters that you could add onto the access list, but for now we're just going to say permit. Okay, and let's back out. Whoops. So let's go ahead and add that access list to our role that we've created. User role, let's see, show rights. And let's pick the one we created, user role, CTN guest logon role. We're going to insert the access list that we just created in between logon control and captive portal. And we can see that would be 1, 2, 3, 4 positions into the list. We could also see that by saying show rights. Oops. Let's see, what did I actually type there? I did not want to do that. Show rights. Show rights with the name of the role I want. And you can see we want it right above this captive portal profile because we want captive portal at the end. So that would be, to add it to the role, we want access list. What did I call it? I always have a hard time remembering what I've named things. Show IP access list brief. I called it CTN guest permit CPPM ACL. That's why I have such a hard time remembering these things. Access list, session, the name, position 4. Now if I do show rights plus the name of the role, we can see we've inserted this access list here. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at these other access lists here. So logon control. Logon control is there to make sure that you can do basic functions including DNS and DHCP, which obviously you're going to need DHCP to get an IP address. And we need DNS because if you don't have DNS, you're not going to be able to redirect your user to the captive portal profile. Okay? DNS must be working. The next access list is the one that we created. Source user, destination, CPPM alias, service HTTPS, permit. And finally, we have our captive portal access list. I don't think it's necessary to go into the details of what's happening here, but just remember that access list needs to be at the end of your logon role for captive portal to work. Okay? Now, a role can also have a captive portal profile assigned to it, as I sketched out on my paint earlier. So let's create our captive portal profile. Let's see, the command is AAA Authentication captive portal, and the name of it will be CTN guest CP prof. Right? Is that what I called it? Probably. Yep, that's what I called it. Okay. Now, under the captive portal profile, we have several things that we can define, but I'm just going to use a few of them here. Let's see, we need, first of all, we need to define what is the URL that the user needs to get redirected to, and that would be the login page. So I'll say login page, followed by the URL that we're going to be using. Now, we haven't actually set this up, so I'm gonna have to try to remember exactly what the URL will be once we actually create the splash page on the ClearPath server. But I think it's going to be https:// the name of the server, which will be ctn-cppm.example.com/guest/ I'm going to name it logon.php. And that is where the user will be redirected when they try to use their web browser, so that they can actually log in. And lastly, I need a default role for when that user authenticates. So I need to actually create a new one. For this rule, we're going to actually make sure that we allow anything to the internet but deny anything internal. Okay? So I'm going to first create an alias for internal addresses. We're going to call it Netdestination RFC 1918 alias. RFC 1918, of course, being private IPs. Those private IPs would be, let's see, do we have network? I think we do. Yes, network 10.0.0.0, 255.0.0, network 172.16.0.0. I always forget this one. It's 255. Okay, so if /16 is 255, /15 is 254, /14 is 252, 13 is 248, and 12 is 240. So 172.16.0.0/12, hopefully I have that correct. And finally 192.168.0.0/16. All of our private IP spaces. Let's create an access list to deny all of those locations. IP access list session deny RFC 1918 ACL. Okay, if the user tries to go to alias RFC 1918 alias using any service, that means any protocol, any port, any application, we're going to deny and log. Okay. And let's create our role. User role is going to be ctn-guest-role. Let's assign our access list. We are going to need access list session logon control so that the user can continue getting DHCP and DNS as necessary. Access list session RFC 1918. Oh, I actually called it deny RFC 1918 ACL. And access list session allow all. So that way they'll be able to continue to do ping, DHCP, and DNS as necessary. They won't be able to get to any internal address. They will be able to get to anything else. Okay? And remember, I guess I haven't mentioned this yet actually. These access lists that we add to the role, what's the name of the role? These access lists that we're adding to the role are applied in order. So this access list gets evaluated first. If there's no match, it moves on to this access list. Still no match, onto this one, this one, this one, and then finally an implicit deny all. Okay? So what we're saying with this role is that you can get your DNS from anywhere. You can get your DHCP from anywhere. Okay? A lot of companies don't like the DNS to come from anything internal. They will only want it to be external. So maybe you might write a rule, something to the effect of, let's just use an example. IP access list session permit external DNS. Alright, I'm not actually going to use this, but I'll just show you how it would be configured. So the source is the user, the destination is alias RFC 1918 alias, and the name of the service is service DNS. I just happen to know that one, and that's going to be a deny, followed by the same rule with a service DNS service allow. Oh, not allow, permit. Okay, but I'm not actually going to use this here, so I'm just going to get rid of that. I just showed you that in case that's something you might want to do. If that was the case, you probably would apply this access list you would apply it above logon control, so in position 3. Okay, that way it hits that rule before it hits anything written in logon control. Okay, and that essentially is just going to make sure that they can't hit any internal DNS. Okay, I'm just going to erase that access list though, because I don't actually want to use it. Oops. There we go. Okay, we've created our role. Let's assign that role that I just created right here. That's going to be part of the captive portal profile under the default role parameter. So show AAA Authentication captive portal. And we're going to go into the captive portal profile I created earlier. Default role is ctn-guest-role. Now I'm going to briefly look through the list of other things that we could assign on the captive portal profile, make sure I didn't miss anything. Now depending on your server, you might need to use some of these parameters like IP address in redirection and so forth. And I don't think I actually need to use these. You can use redirect URL to send them to a specific page after they've logged in. Otherwise it'll just let them go to wherever they were trying to go before. We do need to specify which server group that we're going to use. So what happens when they authenticate? They will reach the splash page. They'll put in their username and password, or they'll accept the terms and conditions, or whatever else they need to do. And finally, they will click the submit button to log on. At that point, the controller is going to send a radius message to an authentication server to make sure that the credentials that were entered are correct. So we need to actually mention which server group we're going to use. So let's use the same server group that we created before. And I don't remember the name, of course. Show AAA server group. Alright, AAA Authentication, captive portal. And the server group is going to be this one. Anything else? Okay, nothing else here for an external captive portal. Now, if you were configuring internal captive portal, that is, the captive portal page actually gets hosted by the controller itself. You might use some of these other ones like user logon or guest logon or something else, but we're doing external captive portal for the sake of this demonstration. Okay, we've defined net destinations, we've defined access lists, we've defined roles. We've defined our captive portal profile. Let's actually make sure that that captive portal profile is assigned. I'll use the show reference command to check that. Show references, AAA, authentication, captive portal, ctn-guest-cp_prof. It is not referenced, so I need to tie it to my logon role. User role, ctn-guest-logon role. Hopefully that's the right one. I want to actually verify. Show rights. Yes. Okay. Within the role configuration, captive portal, and the name of the profile that we just created, which is this one. Show rights. Let's double check our configuration for the logon role. We can see the captive portal profile is now assigned, along with the access list that we've defined. Okay. We need to make sure that that role is the initial role of the AAA profile. AAA profile, once again, I can't remember what it is. AAA profile, ctn-guest-AAA. Initial role is this one. Copy and paste so I don't make a mistake. Show references, AAA profile. So we have not applied that yet. WLAN, show WLAN virtual AP. WLAN virtual AP, CTN guest VAP, AAA profile. Is this one? show WLAN virtual AP CTN-guest VAP. Let's make sure I assign the SSID profile, which I did not. So SSID Profiles CTN-guest-SSID. The VLAN, let's create a VLAN name. VLAN name is guest VLAN. Let's apply it to the virtual AP. VLAN guest VLAN. And finally, AP group. CTN cap-AP group. Hopefully I got that right. Show AP group. Yes, I typed that correctly. We're going to add the virtual AP CTN-guest-VAP. Now everything is set up. Okay? We had to define several parameters. We had the virtual AP, which got added to the AP group. We had the SSID profile, which got applied to the virtual AP. The AAA profile, which got applied to the virtual AP. The initial role, which got applied to the AAA profile. The captive portal profile, which was attached to the initial role. The post-login role, the final role of the guest, which got applied to the captive portal profile. We defined access lists that go into our roles, and we defined Netdestinations or aliases, which get applied to our access lists. And also something that we used here that I didn't actually define anything new for is the net service, right? Which is kind of like an alias for a specific protocol and port combination, right? So remember, we had a net service for DNS, and we had another one for HTTPS, right? The command I did just to look at them really quickly was show run pipe include net service. And we can see all of these net services like I showed you before that you can use to help you write access lists a little bit easier, okay? So there are many components that need to be configured when doing the Open SSID with guest captive portal logon. Okay, and of course you need the fundamental underlying supporting services to be in place as well, such as DNS and DHCP. Now I'm using DNS. My DNS is being hosted by my Windows server that I have in my environment, but for the sake of complete demonstration, let's go ahead and say that we want to actually create a DHCP pool that actually exists on the controller itself for the guests. Okay, because this is something that a lot of customers actually want to do. They don't actually want to use a production DHCP server for guests. They want to just have it right on the controller. So we'll say IP DHCP pool. This is actually a local controller configuration. I shouldn't be doing it on the master controller. So let's go ahead and quickly show configuration diff. All of the commands that I used to get to this point, there were quite a few. Now these are all of the commands since my last write mem, so you actually only see the guest configuration. When I actually do the write mem, if I do the same command, now the list is blank. We'll wait for that to go down to the switches, and it's done on LMS1, it's done on LMS2. Let's reorder this. Okay, so on LMS1, I'll just quickly do show run include VLAN name, and I need to map that one. Actually, very quickly, show profile errors. We can see we have not mapped this one yet. So VLAN CTN-guest oh, not that one. Guest VLAN is going to go into VLAN number 60. Okay. And let's configure our DHCP pool. IP DHCP pool, and we'll call this CTN-VLAN60-DHCP. Now this is very similar to configuring DHCP on a Cisco router or switch if you've ever done that. So we'll start with the network is going to be 10.0.60.0, 10.0.60.0/24. The DNS server will be 10.0.70.3. The default gateway is going to be 10.0.60.1. The domain name will be example.com. And let's see, any other parameters that I actually want to add at this point? No, nothing right now. That should be good enough. Okay. And in order for this to work, first of all, we need to turn the service on. Service DHCP. If you forget to do this, you will be scratching your head for forever trying to figure out why the controller's not handing out IP addresses as you expect it to. We need to do our excluded addresses. So IP exclude DHCP excluded address will exclude our default router as well as the IPs of the controllers in this VLAN. 10.0.60.1 through 10.0.60.3. Now, do I actually have these on my diagram? I don't know. No, I do not. I have not put the guest IP addresses on this diagram, so I'm going to add them right now. VLAN 60 is going to be 10.0.60.2, and this is going to be VLAN 60 10.0.60.3. Okay, so now we've assigned those. They're in our diagram here. Show IP interface brief. We can see we have not defined a layer 3 interface for these VLANs yet, so on controller 1 we're going to do interface VLAN 60 IP address 10.0.60.2/24. Okay. And now I'm going to do one final step. I'm going to split the DHCP scope between the two controllers. So IP address 4 through 129, that seems like a reasonable split. 4 through 129 will be on controller number 1, and 130 through 254 will be controller 2. So let's add another exclusion. IP DHCP excluded address 10.0.60.130 through 10.0.60.254. Now let's show configuration diff. So we mapped guest VLAN to VLAN 60. We created our DHCP pool. We turned on DHCP. We wrote 2 statements for excluded addresses from the DHCP scope, and we assigned an IP address to VLAN 60. I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this to the second controller with some minor modifications. Let's see. This is the same. The pool is the same. Still need to turn it on. But we're going to say the excluded address will be from 1 through 129. Okay, we don't need the second exclusion. And this is going to be .3. And let's copy this onto controller 2. Okay, so now all of that is set up. So we've gone over several things. We went over, let's go back to the agenda. We went over the 3 main types of SSIDs. We went over all of the components that are necessary for the SSIDs, including the VAPs, SSID profiles, AAA profiles, server groups, authentication servers. We went over how to build a role. We went over how to build access lists and our captive portal profile, how one role has the captive portal profile assigned to it, and then the captive portal profile has a final role, a default role that's assigned to it, which I know is a little bit confusing, but hopefully after you've watched this video or maybe gone back and watched this video a couple of times, that'll start making sense. We went over how to use Netdestination aliases and also Netservices. We went over the named VLANs, and we also went over how to configure DHCP on the controller. Okay, so a lot of really good information in this video. Finally, with this, you're actually broadcasting your SSIDs. Let's see, did I actually start broadcasting? Yes, I started broadcasting now, CTN-guest. And that's essentially the configuration that you need to get those types of SSIDs up. Obviously, in a production environment, it could be far more complex. There could be multiple authentication servers. You might have different rules for different types of users. You know, you could, for example, have one role for employees and a different role for engineers, and a different role for contractors, and so forth. You know, and all of them could have different access lists in them. So you can see how, you know, you can build all of these components and then reuse them over and over. There's a lot of bits and pieces, but once you have all of those bits and pieces put together the right way, you'll be up and running. And with that, we'll conclude this video. Our next video is going to be how to do the initial setup of ClearPass, and perhaps also the some services. So look forward for that video. Until then, I hope this video has been informative. I hope you've learned something and you're able to use it in your job, and I'll see you next time.